Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome again to all those subscribers, first-time listeners to another podcast on inspiring change. In my view, the topic of inspiring change is fundamentally critical, especially at this point in time in our history. But before I get into the topics today, I want to do a couple of things. We've had a fantastic week. Firstly, let me thank Andrew Flores, Amy Drury, and Giovanni Foster for being part of our first live streamed show and being part of a very meaningful conversation and one that I'm hoping to be able to pick up with again. So Andrew, Amy, and Giovanni reaching out, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure meeting you and to getting into a very substantial dialogue about change and for sharing some personal experience with myself and the audience. We also had a fantastic piece of news this week, which was that our documentary Masculinity That Inspires Change has been nominated in the Best Documentary category for the Venice TV Awards. So those awards occur after the Venice International Film Festival, so it's a biggie. Now, while a win would be amazing, just getting the nomination is a blessing for our message on equality. So, a fantastic piece of news. So let me pick up from the last time, the live stream. For a lot of us, change occurs not necessarily just because we choose to change, because there's something that we can foresee as being positive. That's a part of it. A lot of times we are actually, in a sense, forced to change through circumstances. Now, on that note, one of the things I want to talk about today is the issue of chaos, crisis, and opportunity, and also how patriarchy stifles our flexibility and adaptability to be able to deal with that whole notion of crisis and chaos effectively. So, I want you to think about in your life some of the things that have made you change. And I use that very deliberately. Let's put aside the stuff that we've picked up on that has helped us to choose to make changes. Okay, so that might be, I want to lose some weight, I want to get fitter, I want to be a better communicator, a better speaker. All those things are relevant. But what about the triggers that are a serious challenge that we often perceive as negative? And the thing I want to challenge is that crisis and chaos is bad. Now remember, I've talked about patriarchal ideology forcing us or setting us up to firstly think in binary terms. It's either good, it's bad, it's us, it's them. And so if we put that thinking aside and we start to look at things more from a holistic point of view, from a more global point of view, surely without crisis, without chaos, we don't necessarily evolve. And that notion of evolution, I think, is really, really important, especially on an individual level, but also on a social level. Now, one of the things that has come with the patriarchal ideology is the supremacy of the individual. So I will protect my territory, I will endeavour to strive for status, I will acquire wealth and power, and I will do so competitively. That's fundamentally the four cornerstones in patriarchal thinking. Now, the problem with that is that it leads us into some really dark places, and there's recently been an article released on how the sort of normative traditional masculine values and characteristics are actually significantly detrimental to men's physical and emotional health and well-being. So one of the things that emerges out of this patriarchal ideology for us as individuals is that firstly, we are not emotionally expressive. We have a lower sense of empathy. That's why I can, discriminate against others, whether it's women or whether it's, other races or religions or ethnicity. So it creates a particular cognitive bias. And it's that cognitive bias in this context which is what I really want to also address. And that is that the cognitive bias that we have is when things are chaotic, not orderly, when we're in crisis, it is fundamentally negative. It's a problem. And I'm going to challenge you to think about this differently. Think about crisis and chaos as opportunities to choose, firstly, to raise your self-awareness, but also to start to become more flexible and more adaptive so that we become more resilient. We can't have order without there also being chaos. The two go hand in hand. And obviously everybody is been, preoccupied with the pandemic. In Australia, we've also had the issue of bushfires and the issues of climate change. And so politics, economy, and ecology are very much on the forefront of a lot of people's thinking. Now, for a lot of us, it's simply a question of surviving. How can we survive effectively in this seemingly crisis-ridden world wherein chaos seems to be the order of the day? So let me work on a couple of issues here. Firstly, in my work with both individuals and groups, one of the things that I talk about as being cornerstones in resilience is the capacity to raise our self-awareness. And that self-awareness is based on being physically more aware, being psychologically, emotionally and cognitively more aware, but also being able to be socially more aware. And that requires ultimately me getting in touch, or as an individual getting in touch with some of my cognitive biases. Now, as you may know, I fall into the category of a white privileged male living in a very vanilla and homogenous environment on the northern beaches of Sydney. So the thing I want to draw on is that in order to really become resilient, I need to do a couple of things first. I need to work on my awareness. I need to work on my flexibility. Cognitive biases tend to be quite rigid, and a lot of times I don't know that I've got those biases. Now, some of them are obviously very blatant, but most of them aren't. And a lot of times we'll think or say something that later on we reflect on and go, well, where did that come from? And often I discover that it actually comes from almost a subconscious place, something that I've assimilated purely through my social exposure, indoctrination, socialisation. Patriarchy plays, as an ideology, a huge role in that whole process of generating cognitive biases. It's a system that's based on, being territorial, about being status conscious and hierarchical, about being acquisitional. Wealth and status are intertwined, and the way to achieve that is by being highly, highly competitive. So we believe that competition is everything. Well, as you know, I'm challenging all those notions, and I'm saying that is not the case. What patriarchy does in that context is that it narrows our emotional responsiveness and expression, and it makes us cognitively quite rigid, and therefore, when we have these biases, apart from anything else, we don't want to let them go. We look for affirmation of those biases. But also, one of the things that it does is it really creates a separation from others. So there's the us and them problem. And as I've argued before, one of the characteristics of patriarchy in its entirety is that it makes us, prone to not being able to empathise. We don't want to empathise because that might just make me think differently about the other person, the other culture, the other religion. So again, I come back to that idea that patriarchy in that context is actually counter-evolutionary. It wants us to maintain the status quo. And that is an illusion. There is no such thing as a status quo unless we try to impose it. And usually we have to resort to dominance and control in its worst possible forms through aggression and violence. The capacity for women to vote didn't just arise from a nice civilised meeting within the British Parliament House or any Parliament House, but rather through the evolution of women to be able to stand up for themselves. Suffragettes were revolutionaries. And as much as I'm always a bit cautious about revolution, because in a lot of instances revolution simply results in changing one regime for an equally oppressive and dominant regime, there are revolutions that are fundamentally important. Some of those physical revolutions, some of those more often than not social revolutions, and that's based on how we think and feel about certain issues. If anyone now suggested in Western culture that women should stop voting because they're biologically inferior to men, I think they wouldn't survive very long in any political or corporate environment, let alone in their families. So it's a really, really important factor. We need very much a way of being that allows us to change. So when I talk about inspiring change, it's actually also connected to inspiring us to embrace ideas of crisis and chaos as an opportunity. I found a really interesting article in Psychology Today. I'm not quite sure when it was published, but the author of that particular article is Robert Berezin. He's a MD, wrote a thing called The Theatre of the Brain. And he quotes Kelly Clancy in an article, "Your brain is on the brink of chaos. Neurological evidence for chaos in the nervous system is growing." And, one of the points that's made in it is the brain is not a computer stuck on top of a body. And that's particularly important to think about. Chaos and order are an interrelated function. From chaos, order emerges. We have mathematical equations that demonstrate that. When we look at, the formation of the universe and nature and chemistry, is things move from a low order of complexity to a higher order of complexity. And one of the things that I tend to think is that, as human evolution occurs, we have moved into a place where our consciousness has continued to evolve and to become much, much more encompassing, but also critically analytical. Now, that's got its downsides as well. Anyone who works with people with anxiety and depression will quickly pick up that a lot of people tend to overthink things. So that's important. Now, in that article, one of the arguments is that consciousness protects us from the chaos of our random environment. It gives coherence to actions and meaning by imposing its learned order as it incorporates chaos from the environment. Again, I don't want to slip into a binary discussion here. It's not that chaos is bad and crisis is bad. It's that these things need to be understood in its context. And when we can see the broader picture, the bigger picture, we come to understand that those conditions of chaos and crisis are fundamentally important aspects to our individual and social growth. So a really, really important piece of information here is that, if we resist change, both in and out of crisis, we are going to impede our resilience. We are not going to adapt well. We're not going to be resilient enough. Now, on a group level, that could be as bad as leading to extinction. Now, I'm sure most of us don't want us to get extinct. Right? We, however, are doing things economically, politically, even in a sense scientifically, that's going to make survivability and thriving a real challenge. This is where I come back to the ideology of patriarchy being dangerous because of its adherence to the status quo as a form of conservatism. We are never completely in balance. Once we're completely in balance, we're static. We don't change. So inspiring change in yourself is about embracing the very thing that often is scary, painful, challenging, difficult. Try to change your pattern of behavior. Pick one repetitive behavior that you tend to use all the time and change it over a 30-day period. What you're going to find is that initially it's actually really quite taxing. It's even stressful at times. But when you come out the other side, it's just another stage, another part of the pattern that we've gone through. So our capacity to start looking beyond what we believe to be order as something that is good is going to be critical. It's going to be necessary because it really will build our capacity to improve our successes in regards to surviving and thriving. And I think that at this particular point in time in our evolution, that's really necessary. So my whole point in the new masculinity is that our shift from being territorial to being inclusive isn't going to be an easy process. It's not just going to be smooth running. Each of us individually are going to need to examine our own cognitive biases, our own heuristics, for want of a better word, that makes us stuck in the old patterns. Similarly, the idea that I can and should respect all of us because we are all human beings and fundamentally more the same than different is also going to create a lot of changes for people. And it's going to be really challenging, and some people are going to resist. They will not want to do that. So they'll consistently revert back to racism, misogyny, sexual biases, all those sorts of things. A lot of our stuff that we take for granted as being the differences between, men and women are in fact socialized behaviors. They've got nothing to do, really, in many respects, to our biology. Even our biology isn't quite binary. There are many, shades of grey in our sexes. But gender, here's one for guys. If you really want to test your socialization with regards to gender differences, try wearing a skirt for a week and see what happens for you in that. Now, if you're Scottish, you might already, I do that, I'll wear a kilt. Great. But watch a Scotsman's reaction when you suggest he's wearing a skirt. He'll get very upset and angry with you because he'll immediately grab you by the throat and go, I'm not wearing a skirt, it's a kilt. All right? So again, there is a cognitive bias around that expression on his part. So we need to consider things a little bit more deeply than what we have. And so, again, one of the things I want to do is I want to help everybody out there who's interested in their own growth and evolution to see their response to crisis, to change, and to the idea of chaos. Right? Most of it won't immediately sit comfortably. And in a way, I'm sort of arguing that maybe it shouldn't sit comfortably. Maybe we should be uncomfortable. I know when I work with people in therapy, one of the key things that often emerges is that the growth that happens often happens through being seriously uncomfortable, even resistant, sometimes oppositional. But these are important steps to take if we are going to evolve as a human being and to become more than what we are in a healthy sense. That we're not shackled by the rules and laws of society, but by our innate moral and ethical sense of what it is to be a great man, a great woman. Most of us don't kill other people because it's illegal. Most of us don't kill other people because it's wrong morally. And I think that's a really good example where we challenge ourselves, and it doesn't need to be in that extreme form. It can be around other things, like, for example, if you really want to test yourself as in your male role, wear a skirt, see what happens. Now, some of us won't even get out of the house. Some of us might get out of the house and then flee right back. So again, just some food for thought. But I think in the time of the pandemic and, ecological upheaval and economic upheaval, what is going to be more important than becoming more self-aware, more flexible, more adaptable? Because we are sure as hell going to need to be a lot more resilient than what we've proven to be. Until next time, thanks for your attention, and I hope you found this interesting. Till next time.
Thank you, Gunter, and thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Again, if you have any questions or comments or ideas for a show, you can email development@noirtainment.com. That's development@noirtainment.com. Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Love can take us so high.